I found one.
I gave them a few souvenirs.
What's up, guys? We're here live with the two Matts, Stefan and Becker, and we are about to throw down on a very interesting topic. It's some data I put together that I think is pretty eye-opening about professional bass fishing, and I wanted to get two pros in here to really break this data down. So we're going to get into all of that. Excited. Thanks for joining me today, guys. I haven't shown you really any of the data, so we're going to give it to you kind of fresh here in just a second. But again, thanks for joining me today.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
You
Yeah,
you should have thought this through better, Johnny. Having two people on named Matt at the same time is probably not a good thing for you.
Now, we
I
got
know.
Stefan and Becker. It's all good. We got last names.
You got to use last names for sure. I think this may be my Fish the Moment debut, so I'm excited to be on here.
Awesome. Yeah, that's thanks for having, for joining and joining me and Stefan on our, rants on here. So we'll see. Hopefully people are going to enjoy the video. But let's get into it. Before we do that, though, I want to give a huge shout out to the sponsor of the Fish the Moment live stream and podcast, and that's Bridgeford Foods. Bridgeford, longtime sponsor of the Fish the Moment long form and live stream content. Huge shout out to Bridgeford for supporting Fish the Moment. Sponsor Matt, sponsor Fish the Moment. They have amazing beef jerky, super tender, and it is a great snack to take to the lake. And they're one of the few non-endemic companies that support bass fishing. So just definitely check out Bridgeford if you're at your local dollar stores, gas stations, Walmart checkout aisles. If you see that bag of Bridgeford jerky, pick it up. You may even see Mr. Stefan's face on the side of one of the end cap displays. So if you guys do see Matt's face, definitely buy some of that jerky because that's going to help you catch some extra fish for sure. Right, Matt?
Yeah, all the bags in those displays, I rubbed on my belly for extra luck.
Good deal.
I gotta say, I mean that Bridgeford is my choice. If I'm trying to buy jerky, I go for the sweet and spicy every time.
Yeah, Matt roomed with me this year, and he was known to grab a bag of jerky out of my boat or truck frequently.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Good deal. Well, let's jump into it here, guys. I got this data pulled up, and it's in Excel, so it's going to be slightly difficult to see, but I'm going to try to zoom the screen in and make it as big as possible. So basically what I did here, guys, is I went in and I tried to grab let's clear this out and try to make it as big as possible. So what I basically tried to do is go in and grab all of the data from Major League Fishing day one for all the different tournaments. And the way that Major League Fishing works, basically, you have a Group A day one and Group B day one. So I grabbed Group A and Group B, and I grabbed first through fifth place and captured the number of fish that were caught. And then I also tried to figure out the number of fish per hour. They fish for 7.5 hours, 3 2.5 hour periods. So the idea here is I wanted to compare the first through fifth place number of catches to the bottom 10 places, 30th through 40th, the number of catches, and show this to basically explain something that's kind of not talked about very much in pro fishing. We'll get into it a little bit, but basically, if you take a look here, if we take a look at day one, Group A, for Toledo Bend, you can see on average 24 fish caught in 7.5 hours. That's 3 fish per hour. 18 fish caught for day two, Group B, basically day one, I guess, Group B. And this is basically day one. Correct me if I'm wrong, guys, this is when the fish are the freshest. It's the easiest to catch these fish, and when guys are actually going after it. I didn't pick day two because some guys lay off their fish and things like that. Most guys are like sending it day one, right?
Yeah. I would say you're going to your best stuff to start the tournament, and there's an elimination in the weight zero after day two. But you want to get off to a quickest start as possible on day one, catch as many as you can. There's no laying off or anything. So day one, definitely it's pedal to the metal, catch every fish you can, and then kind of see where you stand after that day and maybe adjust for day two, like you said. But day one, especially Group A, it seems the weights are always a little better because the fish are fresher. Group B gets the fish after Group A had already beat on them. So typically the catch rate's down just slightly for Group B, but yeah, day one's when you hammer down on them.
Yeah, so that kind of shows here, and you can even see 24 to 18 catches. But despite all that, I mean, this is guys who you guys spend 2.5 days of practice. You prep for this. There's guys who pre-practice all this stuff, and this is a decent number of fish, 3 fish per hour, but I feel like some guys expect or maybe think that pros are catching 30, 40, 50 fish a day, every single day, every single pro in the field. And there's this misconception, I think, just because people watch YouTube videos, they watch highlights, things like that, that guys are catching fish constantly. And while some of the guys at the top of these, leaderboards are catching a good number of fish, if we go down to the 30th or 40th place, you can see here that the average number of fish catches for the bottom 10 guys in the field is 3 fish, which means they're catching a fish, basically 1 fish about every 3 hours, which is not fantastic. And I'm not trying to say this to say that these guys are just like being terrible, all that stuff. A lot of these guys are some of the best anglers, and I didn't put names on here on purpose, but like best anglers in the world, and they're struggling to catch a 5 fish limit in a lot of these events, even though it's first day of the tournament, they have practiced all this stuff. So you see all the guys at the top who are crushing it, but maybe not so much on the bottom 10 guys. And what's interesting about that is that this is Toledo Bend in like prime time. I mean, guys are catching them. It's a good time of the year to be fishing. If we move to Santee Cooper, it gets even tougher. Santee Cooper was kind of a tough tournament anyways. It's a tougher fishery, fish spread out, but 11 fish on average, and that's 1.5 fish per hour, and it's 2 fish average for the bottom 10 guys. So the bottom 10 guys catch 2 fish a day, basically, in this second tournament. Third tournament, Lay Lake in, actually this is just this one day because this is Red Crest. 16 fish average, 2 fish per hour. Bottom of the field, bottom 10 guys, 3 fish all day. Keep going. James River. If we take a look at Group A versus Group B, 23 fish to 25 fish. So James River actually pretty good number of fish, and on the lower end, guys were catching a pretty good number as well. They're catching 7 to 8 fish a day, which is better than compared to the first few events, but still about 1 fish per hour. If we keep rolling, this is the Chowan River. 14 fish per day on average. One of these I know is Becker here in one of these groups here. And then on the low end, 2 fish per day. So pretty interesting there. Finally, St. Lawrence River. Even though St. Lawrence is known for just having a pile of smallmouth, people think, oh, it's the easy fishery. Guys have forward-facing sonar. They just catch every single fish that swims around the lake. 25 fish per day, 3 fish per hour. That's still not like... 3 fish per hour is not bad, but it's not like reeling them in every cast. And then if you look at the lower end, 6 fish per day or 8 fish per day, so 1 fish per hour. So this is very interesting data from my perspective, in the sense that if we kind of look at some of these, this data from this perspective, if we kind of move these columns over and we look at the averages, this data down here at the bottom is basically averages. You can see that the average number of fish caught for the top 5 across all the events, I did exclude Lake Eufaula in Oklahoma because it was a kind of weird event, flooding, fishing was really bad. But 19 fish per day for the top 5 guys, which is 2.5 fish an hour. 4 fish per day on average, which is half a fish per hour, fish every 2 hours. Does this surprise you guys, first and foremost? What's your first reaction to this data?
Yes and no, to be honest. I know Matt and I have actually had this conversation at a lot of the events this year, and going into the events, a lot of the times my goal is just to catch 15 bass, like 5 bass per period. That's typically my goal going into the event, is just 5 per period. So, to see that, I mean, that's pretty above average. And, looking at the data, it proves that, 15 bass a day is pretty strong, no matter where you go across the country, and, time of year, none of that really seems to matter. So it just kind of emphasizes that. But it does surprise me a little bit how low the bottom end is. I would kind of would have expected that to be a little bit higher, just not necessarily. I just didn't expect that much of a gap between, the top 10 or the top 5 and then the bottom 10. I expected them to be a little more even as far as catch rate.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily surprised by the data. I mean, this is, you look at every tournament, there's always guys that caught them and always guys that didn't catch them. What surprised me is that the fish catch count wasn't actually higher. Like I feel, when you're on the water, you feel like it's just like everyone is ding 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 ding, and what I don't know. I just feel like some of those fisheries, when I thought back on them, like the first one or St. Lawrence, man, it felt like guys were catching 50 fish a day, but they still were topping out that that 20 to 30 range, which is really catching them. I mean, especially for the smallmouth at the St. Lawrence, because man, it feels like sometimes they take 10 minutes to retrieve or to catch. But I'm not necessarily blown away by the data. No, Johnny.
Well, that's good. I'm glad that you guys are
about it.
Seeing it. It makes sense to you. One thing I will say though is I feel like the average viewer might be a little bit surprised by this, because I don't think that people look at this data in this way. And the reason I wanted to bring this to people's attention is mainly the fact that, and it's not to say that the pro anglers aren't able to catch them, or to minimize what pro anglers are doing at the top level. But if you look at these anglers, you're dealing with lakes where you are fishing in the middle of the week with 40 guys on the water after 2 days of practice, 2.5 days of practice. So these guys are putting in the time. A lot of these guys have been fishing these lakes for many years. This isn't their first time to a lot of these fisheries, other than maybe like the Choang River, things like that. And despite all of that, when they go to try to go do their best stuff, the bottom 10 anglers, so 25% of the field, aren't even catching 5 bass in a day. And I think that is just something that a lot of anglers need to be aware of, is that how hard bass fishing actually is, even with a lot of preparation, a lot of skill, a lot of time on the water. I think some anglers go out and they're like, man, I see all these guys on YouTube catching fish, and they get discouraged. They don't want to, they don't want to think that, man, catching a fish every other hour is really good. Or maybe I go 4 hours without a bite and then I catch a couple of fish and I'm really, discouraged with my day. And I think that resetting those expectations, especially in this world of forward-facing sonar, because there's so many people who are like, forward-facing sonar just makes the fish jump in the boat, or it makes fishing so much easier. Forward-facing sonar is available in this event. And my question to you guys would be, what would these numbers look like without forward-facing sonar right now? That's kind of one thing that's jumped out at me with this data.
Well, I certainly don't think they'd be as high as they are. I think it's hard to put a number on what they might be, but I don't think the catch rates would be near as high as they are. And I mean, we're about to find out next year, because we're about to fish 2/3 of the Bass Pro Tour season without live scope. So we're going to find out, what exactly it does to the catch rates, but definitely going to lower them for sure. I don't see how it doesn't.
Yeah, I think you'll see a fall off at the top. I don't think it'll have any effect towards the bottom. I really don't. Like, I think when you look at lakes that have a lot of discrepancy from the top to bottom, like Toledo Bend, for example, Toledo Bend, if you were not scoping them, was not fishing good at all. Like, it may have been prime time in terms of seasonality, but the fish were not on the bank. I can assure you there were only a handful of guys that caught them okay doing that. I spent a day and a half in practice doing it, and I think I had 2 keepers in practice doing it. Most of those fish were out in the timber, and from that standpoint, if you weren't doing it, you were probably going to struggle. So I mean, I do think there were some fisheries where you really need to be doing it. But then you go and look at someplace like Santee Cooper, and I don't think it had a huge impact. I think there were guys using it for sure, but I don't think the overall catch rate would have changed that much.
Yeah, I know I didn't catch any on it at Santee Cooper. I think I was leading after day 1. I know I didn't use it at all. I had it on. I didn't actively catch any fish using it, put it that way. Always have it on, using it to just, kind of see depth and see where the grass was and stuff like that. But I definitely did not visibly watch a fish come up and eat my bait on the live scope. So I probably could have fished without it that day and still caught the same. So it's definitely going to be fishery dependent and, time of year dependent. But I mean, you take like the James River, for instance, I kind of had a two-pronged approach where I was starting the day in a little creek, throwing a buzz bait and a chatterbait and stuff. And then as the day would go on, I would kind of transition to, fishing more structure off the bank, whether it was grass or wood or something, and using my live scope for that. So that one was like a good combination for me of, using it and not using it. And I think that was that way for quite a few guys. But that was one where, I don't know if the catch rate would have changed as much as like a Toledo Bend or a Dale Hollow or a Lay Lake, where it definitely would have changed substantially, not using live scope for those events.
For sure. One interesting comment here from Kathy. Basically, she was saying that I'm surprised by the numbers. Maybe it'll help me not get discouraged when I get 5 bass in an outing. And this is something that I've actually, did a recent study on, or it's not really a study, but I basically fished 4 trips with forward-facing sonar, 4 trips without. And I found that the way I was doing it, especially fishing offshore, I would have to graph for 6 of my 8 hours of my fishing day, and I would catch all of my fish within a short window, within a 1 hour window. And I feel like those feeding times are really critical when you're not using forward-facing sonar. There's those little feeding windows, whether it's the winds, the current, something like that happens. With forward-facing sonar, you can kind of catch fish more consistently throughout the day because you can catch more suspended fish, roaming fish, things like that. So even, as we get into this next year where, Matt, you're not going to be able to use forward-facing sonar for 2/3 of your day, that's going to be interesting. And that's kind of where I want to pivot this conversation, is to talking about strategies, for example, of how you would actually go about doing that. And if people aren't aware of the rule change, basically what happened, and I'm going to pull up a map here of a lake so we can break it down on a map too. But basically, Matt, could you give us an overview of what happened in the rule change from MLF?
You got 2 Matts here. You talking to me?
Well, Beck or Stefan, whichever one wants to take it.
Yeah, I'll take it. So actually, Brittany and I filmed a video this morning for our YouTube channel that's going to drop tomorrow. We kind of went through and had a little banter back and forth about it. But basically, 2/3, one period of each competition day, we're allowed to use forward-facing sonar and 360 technology. So 360 is lumped into the live category now. So basically, we have to announce that we're going to use it to our boat official prior to the start of the period, whether it's, before lines in to start the day or the first period break, second period break, but we can only use it for 1 period. And there's going to be some cool things on the score tracker that basically have a little indicator to show if you're using it or not using it, or if you still have it available. But that's just a cool thing on the fan side of things. But as far as the rules, yeah, I mean, it's pretty simple. We can use it for 1 period, not use it for the other 2. In the 2 periods that we're not using it, the transducers have to be covered. So they're going to supply us with a cover that blocks the transmission of the transducer, so there's no way that we could use it or accidentally use it or accidentally see it switching screens on a map or on your unit or whatever. So yeah, 2/3 of the entire season is going to be without forward-facing sonar and 360. So it's very interesting. I've been thinking about it all weekend since the announcement, and I don't think I've made a cast in a tournament without live scope or 360 on the boat since like 2019. So it's going to be a pretty big change for me, and it's going to be a learning curve, and it's going to require me to work harder and practice harder. And, I think it's going to put a little more emphasis on pre-practice and breaking down the lake a little bit more, just having more, pieces of structure or having, a better idea of the whole lake prior to the tournament, just because, there's going to be so much more things in play.
And I think that's really fascinating from a tournament strategy perspective, like from a planning, because you think about someone like, I don't know, we always use Drew Gill as the example of the scoper, but like you guys room with Drew, and it's like Drew might take the strategy of, okay, I am going to try to catch as many fish as physically possible in that one period when I can use forward-facing sonar. And I'm going to try to do maybe 90% of my damage in that time. And the rest of the time I'm just going to try to survive. Maybe he learns how to use 2D sonar and he graphs around some or something like that. We don't know. I'm just kidding, Drew. Anyways, but so there's some things like that. But the other end of the spectrum is you might have a guy who is still very much a non-forward facing sonar angler that's on the BPT, and they say, I'm going to now go all in shallow in my practice because that's what I'm going to be able to do for 2/3 of the day, and I'm just going to keep fishing that way and just maybe even just ignore forward facing sonar completely. Just say, I'm not going to use it at all, and I'm just going to try to find strategies that work. And I honestly think there's a potential that the guys who maybe just pick one or the other may succeed versus trying to do a mixture of both. And I'll get both your opinions on that, but my thinking is, like, in practice and in the tournament, if you're trying to jump between two things, I know from my personal fishing, it's always miserable when you're trying to, like, fish shallow and offshore, or do a little bit of scoping and then do normal fishing. It just, you can't get into a groove. And so I think it may help some guys who decide not to use forward-facing sonar, in the sense that they're just going to go all in on normal techniques, and they might do better just because they don't have that conflict in their mind. And then, again, vice versa. Maybe the guy's just like, I'm going to spend all of my time trying to figure out where and how I can catch the biggest number or the most number of fish with forward facing and not worry about the traditional techniques. What do you think, Stefan? Let's start with you on your thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, it's similar to what Matt was saying. I mean, I'm still contemplating what I'm doing next year, but this is definitely a curveball with respect to the anglers that are fishing either the BPT series or the Invitational series, where you got to decide: do you split up practice? Do you try to find something specifically forward-facing sonar related, or do you try to go all in on one process, and then whenever you can't do that technique, do you go wing it and try to figure something else out? I really feel strongly that the anglers that do the best, whether it's with forward facing sonar or if you want to call it old school fishing, that you commit to it. You really got to commit to it. Especially, that was one thing I saw with the BPT this past year. You got to have a lot of fish. And you just showed that in the results. I mean, you got to be catching a lot of fish, and it's hard just to say, okay, I'm gonna, I want to do a little bit of everything, and then think you're gonna bounce back and forth and catch, a couple fish here, a couple fish there. I personally think for me at least, I was much better off if I had something that I fully committed to in practice that gave me a lot of options come tournament time. My concern, if I were fishing one of these two formats, is how much time in practice do I spend on something that I know I can only use for one period or one day of the first 2 days of competition? Do you go all in on it and then just wing it when you can't do it, or do you really split up your time? It's gonna throw some anglers for a loop. I really do think it's gonna cause some problems.
I agree. It's going to throw a big curveball into the tournament fishing, and just the amount of patterns you're going to see watching live. That's going to drastically change. I mean, you're going to see a lot more crankbaits, chatterbaits, square bill. You're going to see a lot more moving baits trying to cover water and pick off a few of those bonus fish, whether it's, while they're waiting for the correct time to fish their forward facing sonar period, or whether, that's their pattern for the entire day, to pick off, 5 fish a period and, cover as much bank as possible and try and catch their 5 fish a period and, see where that puts them. But it's definitely gonna change things up. For me, I look at a couple patterns. So take brush pile fishing, for instance. You can still fish brush piles without live scope. It just makes you way less efficient, because you don't know exactly where it is. You got to get lined up, using your your mapping or your antenna on your unit and get the boat positioned perfectly to hit that brush pile. So you could still fish that way, but I would say it's going to drop your efficiency in half. So it's going to take you a lot longer to fish the same amount of brush piles. So, that's one thing that I'm looking at. And then, another thing that jumps to mind would be like dock fishing. You can fish docks without live scope. So you could, say in a hypothetical situation, if you're going to fish brush piles in the first period, use your token, as we've been joking and calling it, that your forward facing sonar period, the first period, to go out and catch as many fish as you can that are active first thing in the morning in brush piles. And then as the sun gets up later in the day, you can still fish brush in the second period, just without it. You're going to be less efficient doing it. But as that sun gets higher, kind of transition to, fishing docks, something that you can visibly see with your eyes, a target that you could cast at and throw at. Fish docks that, the fish are hiding under the shade, which would be more of a later in the day pattern. So, those are just some things that have been running through my mind since it came through. But, in a typical situation or, previous to this year, you really haven't seen anyone fish that way.
Yeah, I think you're going to see a lot more people looking for offshore structure like we did in the old days. If it's a ledge, you're looking for the group of fish on the ledge. Places, brush piles, points, places where you can fish them and you feel pretty confident you're casting to where the fish are, regardless of whether you have forward-facing sonar or not. Because those are patterns, like Matt just said, you can do regardless of forward-facing sonar. You're less efficient, but you can still do it. I think the fish that are really going to be more questionable to go after are the suspended fish. If you can find a big wad of them out suspended somewhere, like in the timber, like out on Toledo Bend was, those are the places where, you're really going to be able to potentially catch a bunch of fish. They're not always as easy to find, but that would be, in my mind, the suspended fish are the ones that are going to be more of a question mark, because you might find them and you find a big wad of them, but you're only going to be able to fish for those fish for that time period you're allowed to use the forward-facing sonar. So I think you're going to see people fishing less suspended fish and more specific targets. I also think a lot of it really just comes down to lakes. You can, on your lakes where you do have big suspended populations, especially if you're talking like spotted bass, that's where I think you'll see guys maybe putting more time into using forward-facing sonar in areas that they can't fish without it, because it'll be worth it if you can find those fish. But and if you're going to a place, like down in Florida or the tidal waters, it won't be as big of a factor, because you're probably still fishing the same cover. You just can't use it anymore.
For sure. And I got some comments I want to respond to, and then I want to actually go through some of those scenarios, Matt. And I want to have us all look at a different lake and give like maybe a 30 or maybe like a 3 to 5 minute like explanation of how you might want to target that. But before, got a couple of comments. One, this is a hot take. I don't know if this is true or not. We got two roommates here who can confirm or deny this. One comment says that Drew Gill is better with side imaging than he is with forward-facing sonar. Would you guys agree with that or disagree?
I have no knowledge.
Yeah, I wouldn't say he uses side imaging as much as he uses 2D sonar, to be totally honest. Drew loves just cruising around just on pad looking at his 2D for bait fish or holes in the grass or stuff like that. So I wouldn't say side imaging, but he definitely uses his units at the console a lot more than people give him credit for.
There we go. So that was that one solved. And then the next one, people are saying, there's a comment from Phil saying that Randy's going to be mad that we're complaining about not being able to use live scope. I don't think this is a complaining session. It's just the rules are what they are, and we're just trying to talk about how you would adapt to the rules. So that's all we're doing here. And if it was no forward facing, I know that both these guys would just follow the rules and figure it out. That's just the way it goes. When you're fishing in these tournaments, it's not something where it's like, okay, I'm not going to use forward facing because I don't like it. Like, you kind of have to if you have the skill set there and it's, your livelihood. So on that, let's take a look. So I want to take a look at Beaver Lake. And this is the first lake we want to look at. I fish beaver all the time. And I want to at least explain my process. Let's say we were fishing a Beaver Lake tournament for Major League Fishing. It's every fish counts. So I can kind of give you guys an idea of where I've been catching some fish on beaver literally this past week. And 2 different scenarios that's set up where you could basically fish, one with and one without forward-facing sonar. And I'm going to talk specifically offshore because that's how I fish. So in an area over here the other day, I actually came up to one of these points that's right here. It's a nice little rounded point. There's a creek channel here. There's a flat spot, and there's a rock pile there. And I pulled up, threw a hover rig over the top of it. No forward-facing sonar. I purposely had forward-facing sonar off. I was making the video without forward-facing. Throwing it a waypoint, working the hover rig over it, caught like a 4-pounder right over this. And I found a few other rock piles where I was catching really good fish. And it's an isolated rock pile. And you can target those, like Matt Becker was saying, without forward-facing sonar. Rock piles, brush piles. You have to line up with your waypoints and things like that. But it's a relatively effective way of catching fish offshore. So it's a way you could do it. This requires a lot of practice and time graphing before the tournament to make sure you find all these things. But it's definitely a potential strategy. And maybe if you ran a bunch of this stuff, you could run it without forward-facing for 2 periods and then run it with forward-facing. And maybe your efficiency, as you mentioned, Becker, will drop in half your 2 non-forward-facing periods and double with your forward-facing, but you can run the same pattern and still be doing that same type of technique, throwing at specific targets. So I see that as a potential strategy depending on the situation you're in. The other situation where I caught some nice fish, though, which worked out really well, is I found some fish in the center of a ditch, and they were in 35 feet of water. Now it's on a prototype core tackle rig that we have, and I caught a 3 3/4, a 2.5, and a 2-pounder really quickly in this ditch, basically doing the Demiki style technique. And I graphed them up with 2D sonar and with side imaging, found these fish, dropped the active target, went, fish for them, caught the fish. And I see this as another potential option, especially if you maybe did an interesting split where you said, okay, I'm going to spend my first period non-forward facing, my middle period or my later period forward facing. And what I might do, this is something I would do on beaver at least because there are those suspended fish, is actually just graph for the first entire period of the day and try to locate schools of fish around these areas, graphing all of these drains and ditches and things. Because I know on beaver, the fish move relatively quickly, even from one day of practice to the next. So not every one of these drains is going to have fish in them, even if I found them there in practice, because those fish are pelagic. They move around, they shift, and they change. So I would graph a lot of these little creeks and inlets and stuff like that and try to find groups of fish during the actual tournament day. This map isn't loading super well for me right now, but during the actual tournament day, and spending my time actually graphing for these fish. And then once I find maybe 3 or 4 schools, I can run them really quick in the 2.5 hours of my fishing and try to, get rich in that little bit of time. And if you find enough schools in that first period, maybe you can use your second period for that, and then third period, just go fishing and try to just catch a few more bonus fish. So those are the 2 strategies I would implement. What are your all's thoughts on that? And what else might you try if you were on a lake like Beaver?
So I guess it's really seasonally based on beaver, but beaver's a great pattern lake. So I tend to agree where I would be trying to find some offshore groups of fish for the forward facing sonar period or day. And I would probably be then looking to run some sort of pattern. It's probably more rock transitional based or something along those lines. But beaver's a really good lake. All the Ozark lakes are really good with that. So I would think I'd be looking to find. It kind of depends again. If you're total weight format, I'd be looking for some of them big groups of spotted bass. If it's 5 fish format, I might be concentrating more on your isolated targets and brush piles and things like that. But if it were me, I'd be looking to find them groups that I could scope, and then I'd be looking for some form of pattern that I could run blind and look at it visually, most likely.
What about you, Becker?
I agree with that. I kind of touched on it earlier. I think fishing specific targets on the bottom is going to be super key without, for the non live scope periods or the live scope day in the invitationals. Like, I think having those targets that are on the bottom, something you can cast and drag, and feel what's down there. I think those are going to be pretty important pattern, and that's probably what I would do is, depending on the time of year and the fishery and, the seasonal patterns, I would definitely find an area of fish or an area with a lot of bait fish and a lot of fish feeding on that bait fish suspended out in the middle of nowhere to use for my, live scope period. And then the other two, I would probably run those, little isolated pieces of structure, whether it's a rock pile, a brush pile, a tree, something like that, I can still fish using my mapping and lining up the boat, and, maybe even triangulating off the bank. I mean, we're getting old school now, but I mean, I think that's going to be the way to do it is to still fish those isolated targets for fish that are relating to structure. But, it's definitely going to slow down your efficiency. So it's going to take you a little bit longer to fish those effectively. And I think you'll see the catch rates drop accordingly. But, man, I would definitely take a two-pronged approach. I don't think you could commit to all in on one pattern on a lake like Beaver, especially to use your, I feel like you would be wasting your forward-facing period to not look for some suspended fish or some fish that are on bait for that time frame you're allowed to use it, and then, kind of transition into a secondary pattern for the rest of the day.
Would you guys have concerns that you would spread yourself too thin where you wouldn't have enough time to establish a good pattern if you, let's say, tried to do forward facing for 2.5 hours? Because now we see the numbers we shared at the beginning where, like, some guys are struggling to catch 5 fish in a day. So I know that it sounds nice when you break up your day 2.5 hours forward facing and then 5 hours pattern fishing. I know on Beaver, though, personally, it might take me 3 or 4 hours to find a good section of the lake where the pattern is working, and then sometimes that's current related, sometimes it's wind or cloud cover or sun, and so you might get on a pattern, but if you're not doing it all day trying to do that, you may run out of time, you might miss something. So it seems like this great concept. I think that it's a little bit harder to do this pattern fishing if you want to do a mix of both. I feel like it almost feels like, at least in my opinion, you need to commit to one or the other in some way, or at least commit to a pattern where you can use forward facing and not use it, but it's a similar type of deal. So you're learning the lake and learning and understanding what's happening, rather than saying, okay, I'm going to go fish bluff walls with a mag draft swim bait, or I'm going to go fish rock transition banks with a jig. But I'm going to do that for one period. Then I'm going to go back over here and try to go catch some fish out of a drain with a Demiki rig. And then I'm going to come back and try to go figure out the rock transition thing again, or vice versa. Like, I feel like that would split up your groove too much. Do you agree with that, or is that crazy?
No, definitely. I mean, that'd be a lot of information to process go all at the same time. But, for me, I mean, I'm going to have to really pay a lot more attention to my practice days. I'm going to pay a lot more attention to when I get the most bites in practice, on a certain pattern. And you're going to have to adjust and choose your live scope period based on that information. Now, you could get a change in weather or conditions that, may move that bite window to the afternoon or first thing in the morning or middle of the day. So like that's part of the strategy with this rule change that I don't think anybody really understands yet. And it's going to kind of be everyone figuring it out all at the same time as we go. But I've always liked to fish, kind of put myself in a section of lake and kind of figure out multiple ways to catch them in that section. That way I'm not running all over the lake back and forth. So I don't think that will change very much in my approach, but I'm definitely going to have to expand and find multiple ways to catch fish in those same areas, to use for the other periods.
Stefan?
Yeah, I mean it's it's one of those things where we've got only a few days of practice to break it down. I mean, every lake you go to, you're going to run into that issue. I mean, it really is. And I do tend to agree with what Matt just said on that. I mean, if you can find an area of the lake that's really got a lot of stuff going on and a lot of different ways you can catch them, that's generally a better way to do it. It's not, we're sitting here talking like, how are we going to go back and do it? The reality is, I mean, up until a couple of years ago, I mean, we all fished this way. So I don't think I don't think we're asking us to do anything crazy. I just think it's going to be a little bit of, or maybe not relearning, but like, having to go back to the old ways of how you went ahead and fish some offshore structure without the technology that would show us where it is. I mean, that's going to be the most frustrating part for the anglers when you've got a brush pile that is there and you just made 5 to 10 casts and you're like, where is that stupid thing where, you knew before you could just scan over there and be like, okay, first cast, dropping it in there. So there's going to be some frustrations with it. But the reality is, I mean, we all did this for years without the technology. It just goes back to waypoints become a heck of a lot more important. How people are marking spots. If anything, I think a lot of us have probably gotten lazy with respect to our waypoints. It used to be you needed the waypoint right on the dot. You needed the waypoint where the boat was or where you were casting from. You wanted, I used to drop waypoints everywhere on stuff just so I knew I was going to be lined up properly. And it's turned into, just throw a waypoint down in this area. And when I get there, I can find what I'm looking for real fast with the technology that we have. But I mean, you go back and you look at, how many fish used to be caught on the ledges and stuff like that. I mean, it's not like we've never done this before. It's just going to be a matter of what's different more than anything is really the fact that we were never limited to what we could do before. You could fish however you wanted to fish. And in this case, we're being told you can only commit a period or a day to a certain technique, which then changes how you practice because you don't know how much time and effort you should put into something that you're going to be limited to use.
And I will say I disagree with you on one point there, Matt, that it's just...
You can't, Johnny.
I do. It's Stefan, not Becker. I would never disagree with you, Becker. But with Stefan, one thing... So maybe I have a different perspective because I've literally been going out and fishing without forward-facing sonar, and then with it, I'm doing like every other trip. It is so frustrating to try to do like half your day forward-facing, half your day without. I've literally tried it, and it's a different skill set. It's a different.
I just said it would be frustrating.
No, but what I'm saying is it's not the same baits. Even it's not the same like. So what I'm getting at is when I go out and I did my videos without forward facing, I caught most of my fish cranking with a jig. I'm targeting fish that relate to the bottom. I had to wait for the current to set the fish up. There's all these different elements that fish will set up on certain types of offshore structure and cover because of different factors, where a lot of times with forward-facing sonar, you can just pull up there and, that fish is 20 feet to the right of that brush pile. I'll Demiki rig them. This fish is sitting on the bottom. I know to throw the worm. This fish is over here. I'm going to do this, and you're reacting because you can see them. Where what I'm having to do is graph these fish with side imaging, down imaging 2D. I determine what they're doing there, and I have to make sure that those fish aren't pelagic. They aren't moving. They're setting up on an object, and I'm catching them with more traditional, crankbait jig. And it's a different game, honestly. Like, and I can say that because I do both consistently, and I don't think that it's just a difference of like, it's hard to line up on the spots. It's like the techniques and the retrieves and the timing is all different when you're fishing without forward-facing sonar.
You don't know what that is without the forward-facing sonar.
Yeah, and unless you've done it for years. So I'm not. I do think it's a lot. It's oversimplifying it to just say, take away forward-facing sonar. I'll just go to the same spots and throw it at dots that are like more precise, and I'm gonna catch those fish.
I didn't say. I said you're gonna go fish specific targets.
Yeah, but it's like a mental game, like switching between the two, because it's like you have to have a completely different mindset. It's hard.
It's like putting on blindfolds halfway through the day.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You
it's
can
a
you
whole
can see
different
everything, and then you're putting on blindfolds, and now you can't see everything, and you got to just guess where it's at. I mean, it's definitely going to be frustrating for me. But the other thing that we really even haven't talked about yet is I feel like the fisheries have changed over the last few years. They're getting more pressure, and the fish are definitely smarter. So I mean, it's going to make it really difficult to target and catch fish when you can't put a bait right in front of their nose and present it naturally. Where you're going to make a cast at a target where previously you would see that your bait is falling and stop it and hold it above that fish. Well, now it's just going to sink to the bottom till you feel it, or that fish catches it on the fall. But I feel like with the amount of pressure these fish have gotten recently, like it's going to make things pretty difficult to catch them. And it just goes all the way back to where we started with the data. I mean, it's going to be difficult to catch bass, more difficult than it has been. And I think it's just going to continue to get harder.
It's brutal right now. I mean, I can tell you from my recent trips that offshore fishing has become way harder without it. I used to do it, and I still actually really enjoy catching fish without forward-facing sonar offshore. I feel like I'm really good at it. I can catch a limit of fish almost every trip I go without forward-facing sonar still. So it's like I'm graphing for 6 hours to find my fish of an 8-hour day, and it's a grind. I'm to find the fish that are set up right and everything. And my bait selection is completely different than when I use forward facing. Honestly, like when I go to the lake, I pull all the rods off my deck on my forward facing sonar days, and I put brand new different rods on the deck when I go out without forward facing sonar. Literally completely different lineup of baits. And that to me, like that's what I've had to do, and I've had to stop trying to have half forward facing, half non forward facing, because it screws me up so bad. Because it's like, I hate to say it, it's like a different sport, but it kind of does feel like it. My analogy is like it's almost like playing pickleball versus tennis. There's different rules between pickleball and tennis, but we know which one is a little bit easier, more approachable. You still have to learn about the kitchen and all these things with pickleball, but like, is a good pro pickleballer going to play, equal to Nadal or Federer or tennis? I don't know. And maybe that's a bad analogy, but that's kind of the analogy I would make about it, to be honest, because it's more of an art skill. I don't know. Maybe I'm putting pickleballers down, but I don't know. That's kind of that's what I'm thinking.
I'm not a pickleball fan.
No, why not?
Because it's destroyed the sport of tennis.
And you're not a forward-facing fan either, Matt. So I mean, I think this is a good analogy, right?
Hey, you're putting words in my mouth right now. I have not. I am so in the middle on forward-facing sonar. It's ridiculous. Like to the point where it's basically like politics, right? You got so far left side, so far right side. You can't talk to either of those groups of people. I feel the same way with forward-facing sonar. So it's like, I don't like pickleball because they're taking over the tennis courts. Tennis is a great sport. Pickleballers, go get your own dang court. Like, go do that. Leave the tennis courts alone. That's what I have to say.
I'm going to agree with you. I can't remember the last time I've seen somebody playing tennis.
It's because there's too many pickleballers on the court. They can't even get in.
Yeah.
Just change those words to scopers and non-scopers, and we're having the same conversation we're having in bass fishing right now.
Are you a pickleballer?
Me? No. I like playing tennis.
Yeah, you are. Look at you.
Where does ping pong fit into all this?
I mean, that's a whole different thing. At least you're not using the same court, like, Anyway, so I don't know. By the way, Matt, or for Stefan, they said that someone said that they're available for couple counseling for us. We talk to each other too much. We're too comfortable. We just we go back and forth. Anyways, but one thing I do think that's interesting from this is, like, if we take a look at a different lake, the concepts change. So I want to pick a lake that is a little bit different, and that's Lake Dardanelle on the Arkansas River. So Lake Dardanelle, this is a very shallow, muddy fishery, and I think this is where the strategies could get really fascinating with this deal, because there are guys who, for example, can go into Spadra Creek and they can find isolated stumps and lily pad stems and all kinds of stuff. And I mean, I know Becker, you were doing that a little bit on some of the one tournament this year, and you could roll into an area like this and you could catch a bunch of fish potentially if you found the right little deal, and you wouldn't need forward facing sonar. And maybe you could even throw perspective mode down and, you know, do that for a period. And that's one very valid strategy that could allow you to do really, really well. On the flip side, you could also go to Piney Creek in the Narrows here and literally drop your trolling motor and just go down in through here and scope fish all day long, because it's clear enough where you could pick off those fish individually, and there's big fish in this area too. And a guy could figure out, okay, I can do this in Piney, I can go over here to the strip pits back here on Lake Dardanelle and find fish there in this clear, you know, old strip pits and find fish suspended. And like, I think that this is the tournament where like a guy could 100% go all in on one or 100% go all in on the other. But it's really hard. I know from fishing Dardanelle, it's not just, hey, I'm going to go check these Narrows or check a couple spots for one day of practice, and then I'm also going to go try to find a loaded lily pad stem field. Like, if you want to find a loaded lily pad stems, you need to spend your entire practice finding an area like this. So that's where I think that it's going to get a little bit trickier. What are you guys' thoughts on a scenario like this? And this is like a springtime event, so I know it will change by the season, but that's just an example.
Yeah. I mean, I think you'll see more guys go all in on shallow fishing for sure with this change. You'll see guys that were somewhat on the fence, where like it was in the back of their head that they needed to be scoping somewhere, but that's not their favorite thing to do. They prefer to fish shallow, and it was like, they were torn. They were going back and forth and never really committing. But I think you'll see those guys commit to shallow fishing and have a much better year. Like, I think they'll be able to commit and just focus on that. And with the, you know, the pace slowed down and the catch rates not being the same, that they'll be able to compete and they will do well this year. I mean, you'll definitely see those guys, you know, probably do better than they have in the last couple of years. But for me personally, I mean, I like doing everything. You know, I have a hard time, you know, really changing things up, fishing deep, fishing shallow. Generally, I like to sample a couple things at practice, but typically for me in a tournament, my best events are when I really hone in to like one or two patterns and commit my whole day to those one or two things. So that's typically what I'm looking for in, you know, especially a fishery like this that would be shallow, is I'd be looking for a big area that I could spend the bulk of the day in, you know, whether it's this creek here, you know, big open bay that has lily pads or grass or something. I mean, that's what I'm looking for, is a big area where I can spend a bunch of time, fish around, you know, throw chatterbait, swim jig, you know, things like that. And then, you know, if there's an area close by, you know, maybe just a little bit further out that has some submerged stumps or something, I can turn my live scope on and use it for a period there. But that's what I'd be looking for on a fishery like this, is more so a big area that I could kind of hunker down and spend the whole day in and just fish, you know, just do a couple different patterns in that area, but just hunker down and fish in that one big area.
Yeah, I agree completely. As one of those anglers, I would very much concentrate on shallow water fishing. I'm very disappointed that this change was made for next year, because I don't get to see it implemented. But I tend to agree. I mean, I think on the majority of lakes, you're going to see the shallow water guys not change that much. I think they're going to kind of stay the course. And if something, I don't want to say falls in their lap, but if they stumble on something that they can, you know, really catch them good with the forward-facing sonar, at that point, then they'll utilize their one period. But if they don't have, you know, in the BPT, if they don't have a specific spot to use it, I think you'll just see, you know, a guy say, well, you know what, this stretch has some offshore stumps, so I'm gonna use it for this period while I'm, you know, fishing through the lily pad stem field or whatever it is. And, you know, it's not going to be a huge thing. It's not going to dictate their day. Let's put it that way. It's just going to be something where, yeah, I'm around some stuff, I'll use it in the second period now.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating to really think about that, because I know I just knowing, I know Lake Dardanelle really well. It's like my home lake, so it's I know that this is like, I'm talking very specific to this lake, but like I could see in a March tournament where you could find a guy who pulls up into the strip pits first hour in the morning and catches 19 scoreable bass in an hour using forward-facing sonar in this area. And if I was going to fish a tournament on Dardanelle, like, I know so much about this lake. I know where a lot of the juicy little stump things are mixed with the lily pad stems and all that stuff. I wouldn't do that personally. I would try to be going in the clearest water I could find and trying to spend my entire practice trying to figure out how to scope up fish in one period and then just kind of wing it for 2 periods. Because I think that the benefit or the potential of getting 10 plus fish in a period is way too appealing to not spend my entire practice trying to focus on forward-facing sonar. Because if we look at our catch rates again, if I kind of go back to what we started the day with, and this is kind of what I think is kind of interesting, is like, if we go back to our catch rates that we showed, 19 fish a day will get you to be a top 5 on average, and that was with forward-facing sonar for the entire day. So I think that might even drop down to maybe 15 fish a day. So if you could figure out how to catch 10 fish in a period, and you could spend your entire practice just say, I'm going to try to find the biggest group, whatever it is, and then I'm going to catch my fish, maybe mess around for a little bit, and then catch like 13 fish or something. I know I'll make the next round, and then I'm going to go practice the entire rest of the time to try to find another group where I can pull up and do the same thing. I feel like that is an extremely valid strategy and maybe better than trying to find that needle in the haystack up shallow, because it is easier in some lakes. Maybe that's, specific to Lake Dardanelle, but like I know Lake Dardanelle so well, and I think I could catch him up shallow, but I just probably wouldn't do it. I would be
problem.
scoping.
Like, I mean, it's one thing if you've got the knowledge on a lake. If we're going to a lake blind, I don't know how. I don't know. I understand what you're saying. Like, the risk reward is great from the standpoint of if you find that spot, but if you spend your 2.5 days of practice and you don't find that spot, then you're up.
Yeah,
you're up whatever creek that is, right? So, like, from that standpoint, it's a risky thing. If you know it's out there and you know on a lake that has it, you're sitting here saying you think you go catch 19 fish in a period on Lake Dardanelle, and I would pull up tournament results and say nobody's caught 19 fish out there in the last 5 years. I mean, it's there may be times it's great, but the results don't indicate that that's an easy thing to find by any means. I mean, when was the last time you fished it?
Oh, it's been years. So, like, yeah, when I was fishing it back in, 2010, like, 19 fish a day was nothing. But, like, yeah, now it's brutal. But I haven't been out there with forward-facing sonar, so I don't know. That's the other thing, is I don't know how many guys are doing that either. And there's a lot of sneaky stuff that guys do with forward-facing that doesn't even get talked about on podcasts like this. And
what are they doing?
There's these, I guess the other thing is, like, this is the last question I'll have, because I know you have to get rolling, Matt or Stefan. But, like, if you're a pro angler and you could spend your off season doing 2 things. One, trying to find the fastest way to find forward-facing sonar fish and try to find this new forward-facing technique that no one's doing so you can find untapped fish. Try to do that. Or try to relearn how to triangulate with waypoints on offshore structure and trying to figure out how to find fish up shallow. If I was a pro angler, I probably wouldn't, if I didn't know how to do the old stuff, I probably would just ignore it if I could still use it for a period, forward-facing for a period, and try to find something that nobody else has ever done before, because now I'm fishing for basically, untapped fish that have never been pressured before. If I could figure something like that out, I now have a massive advantage over the field. Why would I try to go relearn what everyone else who has been on the tour for 20 years already knows? I'm going to try to find that new thing that nobody's doing. That's at least my opinion too. So I think it might see people who are specializing even more into forward-facing sonar with this rule versus trying to do the opposite. And the guys who do figure that out may still dominate. And it still might be dominated by one period of forward-facing sonar. I don't know if that's true, but I could see that happening.
I could see that happening for sure. I mean, you're going to have to figure something out and catch them quick, fast, and in a hurry. But you can definitely, compete And then, you fall back on something like skipping a wacky worm around or something, and you're going to pick off a few fish the rest of the day. But if you got something you could go to, whether it's right to it the first period or save it for the second or third period or whatever, and you got something that you can do and, do it better than everybody else and catch more fish than everybody else, you're still going to do well in the standings. You're going to move up there. And, for me personally, I think my focus this off season is going to be getting better at casting. I feel like I've gotten a little sloppy with my casting, especially, with LiveScope the last few years. You don't have to be as precise and get it underneath things or, in tight spots. You're not worried about the splash as much as when you're shallow fishing. You just kind of getting out there and you're not as precise casting. So that's really my priority, is to get better at, skipping docks and putting my, a jig into tight places that if I have to fall back onto that pattern to get a couple bites, that I feel like I will be, at the highest level of that particular technique when I need to. But as far as figuring out new techniques, I mean, I'm definitely going to keep LiveScope on my boat all fall and winter and definitely mess around with it and continue to stay on the hottest trends and best minnows and jerk baits and things like that I can, still utilize that. But I'm really, my gut's telling me that I'm going to have to fall back and have, a jig on deck every single day, a jig and a wacky worm and skip that at targets I can see. And, I feel like if I can get my casting as good or better than everybody else, that will benefit me with a few extra fish throughout the year and help me keep an above average catch rate.
Can we get a Rocky style montage of your casting practice and then get to the first tournament and put that on your YouTube channel? By the way, if you haven't seen Matt Becker's YouTube channel, definitely go check it out. It's Matt Becker Fishing. Go on YouTube, check him out. He has a great channel, posts 3 videos a week, and shares a lot of great tips. So, Angler of the Year, multiple time tour champion. So, check out the stuff for sure. Stefan, what were you going to say?
No, I'm just thinking now every time I go down a bank and I see a bait hanging in the tree, it was one of Becker's.
It was mine.
based on that statement. No,
for sure. I'm not a good caster. I will be the first to admit.
Dude, you say that I don't believe that.
I promise you.
Johnny, I think going back to your statement, I don't expect the top to change. I don't think you're going to see a different wad of anglers. I think you're going to see, if we're talking BPT, I think you're still going to see the same names at the top, and I think you're going to see guys that excel with the forward-facing sonar that are able to catch enough in one period that they're going to stay at the top. I think what if I had to predict what's going to happen, it's going to create tighter weights in the middle, and I think you're going to see guys that I think you're going to see a smaller group of guys that excel. You're going to see a bunch of guys that went all in and maybe have a really good tournament or a really bad tournament. And then I think you're going to see more guys have overall consistency. And I think you're going to have tighter fields. But I fully expect to see guys like Matt, fighting for AOY at the end of the year. I think the objective to this is partially to create tighter, more exciting tournaments. But I really think we might also see how valuable forward-facing sonar can be, and you're going to see some guys that are, able in one period, they're able to catch enough weight to, keep them in the top, keep them advancing to the next rounds. And I think the winners will be ones that have, on lakes where forward-facing sonar plays more. I think you'll see the winners continue to dominate using forward-facing sonar, even though they can only use it for one period.
So here's one last hot take then for you guys that you guys may be able to, or maybe it's just a topic that you guys can respond to before we close out here. So what do you think the perception or the conversation will be at the end of 2025 if on the BPT, the AOY catches 80% of their fish in the forward-facing sonar periods, or 75-80% of their fish in those periods, and 20% in the other periods? And it's guys are just, you can see that the forward-facing periods are just, people are just dominating there, and they're just not catching them with outside of that. Do you think that would cause more drama? Would you think that would be, I guess, what would you think the reaction to that would be, just off the top of your head?
I mean, we're gonna have drama no matter what.
Yeah.
With what's just happened with the three organizations, you have just allowed for there to be, in my opinion, 3 times the amount of drama. Because now, not only was it just, hey, everyone's using forward-facing sonar, now there's going to be comparisons between leagues using it or not using it or partially using it. And really, the issue I have with all of this, I really feel like the anglers are the ones that are going to be subjected to the most scrutiny. Like, I feel bad for all of the anglers, because our numbers are going to be just analyzed beyond belief. And the reality is, every guy can have a bad tournament. Every guy can have a bad season. I mean, I had the worst season I've had this past year and potentially my professional career. And people look at it. I mean, I had comments the other day on my YouTube video I put out where Matt's an old guy. He can't hang with the forward-facing sonar guys. Go to NPFL. And it's like, man, I have 1 year, and honestly, it's not, I had 1 year with more lost fish than I've ever had. And, it cost me severely. But the reality is, we are going to be scrutinized. And I don't think it's necessarily fair to put it on the anglers in this instance. We're doing what we need to do to compete, regardless of what league we fish. And we've just really opened this whole can of worms up to being even worse than it was this past year. Because, everything was looked at from a forward-facing sonar perspective in 2024. Everyone has all these issues and these concerns, and in my opinion, we didn't really fix anything, because I don't know that there's an answer to it, but we didn't solve the viewers or the fans' questions. All we did is open everything up to scrutiny, and it's going to be worse by the end of next year, is my opinion.
I agree. Because take a Drew Gill, for instance. If he has another great season, but he catches all of his fish in 1 period a day, if he wins an event and only catches fish in 1 period, I mean, that's all people are going to focus on, is he can only catch them with it. Like, it takes away from the accomplishment.
And Matt, if so, you're Drew Gill, you just in the first period caught enough weight to advance to the next round. What are you going to do for period 2 and 3? You're going to go looking. You're going to go practice. You're going to go find whatever you can. You may never make a cast. You might graph the whole time looking for another school of fish. And he's doing what he needs to do to make the next round or win the tournament. And the reality is, he's going to be scrutinized because he didn't catch him the other 2 periods, which is completely BS, because he's doing what every good tournament angler should do. It's the same thing in a 5-fish derby. Getting to the point where you've caught enough weight to make the next round is the same thing in a 5-fish derby, where you feel like you've caught enough weight where you can't do much better that day. So you'd rather not burn your fish. So you go practice, you go look. And we're all going to be scrutinized now. And it's just, I don't think it's fair to the anglers. I really don't.
Well, I'll leave it on this one too. I always find this fascinating. So, like, my YouTube views, I've talked about this on BTL and a few other places. My YouTube views on forward-facing sonar videos are drastically down. And whenever I don't use forward-facing and I just go with the traditional technique, side scan, down scan, 2D, my views are a lot higher. I spend the same amount of time staring at a screen in either case, because I'm now graphing without forward-facing sonar for 6 hours, driving around, finding the fish with my forward-facing, or with my traditional sonar, in a way that they're set up so I can catch them throwing at a waypoint. So I'm graphing for 6 hours, which is not a sustainable thing for most people to do, but people want to see the groups of fish, and they just want to watch me catch them. If I was fishing in the BPT, I'd probably be graphing for 2 periods of my 3 periods, just graphing, and then I would catch my fish in a period, regardless of whether I was using forward-facing sonar or not. I would be staring at my graph. And then you could say, okay, well, Johnny can't catch him without his sonars. Well, I use my fish finders as my tool to help me be efficient and gain an advantage over the competition when I was fishing tournaments in the past and things like that. And it's fair game, and it's part of the rules. So, I guess I understand the point of, okay, if you want to have it be fair, it's to take away all electronics then and just have people use, a map, a paper map. I mean, I guess you could do that, and that might be what people want, but there's no way by taking away forward-facing sonar, at least in my opinion, that you're going to stop people from complaining, because then the next thing is, oh, look, he only uses side imaging, 2D sonar down imaging, and he can only catch him with that. And that's the next thing, and they're going to want to ban that. And so it's like, no one's going to be happy, but I do think, to your point, Becker, we need to make the tournaments exciting. I loved watching you win the team series and watch Stefan and Gil going back and forth, all that. That team series was awesome, super fun. There was not any drama about forward-facing sonar, though you guys were able to use it on your boat. That wasn't the focus of the event. That wasn't the topic of discussion. And if we reframe pro fishing in a different way like that, you could take away focus from forward-facing sonar rather than putting a spotlight on it. That's a bad phrasing right there. But anyways, put a spotlight on forward-facing sonar. Put it on the pro anglers, the interactions, ways to make it engaging for the fans. That will take away a lot of the drama as well. And I think that it's almost like we're trying to reinforce the drama rather than trying to find new ways to position bass fishing and position tournament fishing. So that's my opinion. I don't think that banning it or not banning it or whatever is going to solve anything, because people are just going to keep complaining. That's my personal opinion.
I agree. I think people are always going to complain no matter what the leagues do or what we do. But I do feel bad for the anglers. I like I said, I feel like it's kind of dividing more and more. And you're going to have people that catch all their fish only in one period, or majority of their fish only in one period. And that's going to, divide them even more and continue the banter back and forth. But, at the end of the day, I think the goal behind all of this is to diversify the fishing a little bit. Like you said, the team series was fun. Just that is more of a no practice thing than it is a style thing. If we were able to practice for those team series events, you would see a lot more guys staring at their screens, whether it's just lining up at targets on a map or, actively targeting fish with active target. Like, you would see a lot more of that because you would have already have information. You'd have locations where those fish are at. The cool thing about the team series was, we had no practice, and a lot of guys had never been on that body of water until that day. So you show up and you're actually breaking it down during the tournament. And that's what a lot of people enjoy about that, I feel like. But I mean, we'll find out this year. We'll see what the fans think of it. And, I think it'll turn out to be a good thing. It'll diversify the ways fish get caught at each event. It won't all be, all fishing deep or all fishing shallow. There'll be a mixture at all times throughout the day. But, I think it'll be a good change for sure.
Good deal. Well, thank you guys for joining us tonight on the stream. It was great getting a lot of comments in the chat. Thanks everyone who was interacting with the chat. And I'm going to try to keep rolling these live streams out, guys, every week on Monday. So we're going to have a bunch of different topics. I'm going to have a few forward-facing sonar guys come on, maybe try to share some juice there, some old-school bass fishing, try to break down lakes, at least some part in every single stream. Huge shout-out again to Bridgeford Foods for sponsoring the Fish Moment live stream and the podcast we have, and also Matt Steffen here, wrapping his boat, putting his beautiful face on all of the end cap displays in certain stores across the country. So great company that supports bass fishing. Definitely check out Bridgeford Foods. Beef jerky, got good summer sausage, some other really good stuff. Anything else you guys want to share or say before we sign off tonight?
Thanks for having me on, Johnny.
Yeah, thanks again for having me on, and I'm always game if you need someone to come on and talk some fishing. So you let me know.
Good deal. Thanks, guys, and appreciate everyone joining the stream. We'll see you guys next week.
See ya.
See ya.